Here in studio, we have Carlo Alcos. Carlo is a videographer, documentary filmmaker, location sound recordist, sound designer, and mixer. You'll find him filming everything from live music to extreme sports. Carlo is currently working on a documentary which will explore the themes of identity and belonging from his perspective as a second-generation Filipino Canadian. Welcome, Carlo.
Thank you for having me, Shayna.
Well, it's pretty special to have you here with us because you usually are with us behind the mic as our sound recordist and editor. But now here you are sitting in front of it, and I get to ask you some questions.
Here I am.
Here you are. So I'm sure many of us think we know, but really have no idea what a filmmaker does or a sound recordist. And I want you to please paint a picture for us of what somebody in your shoes working with the skill set you have actually does for your job.
Sure. I like to call myself a documentary filmmaker just to specify that. I don't generally work on narrative films, although I would love to one day. But for now, I, as a documentary filmmaker and as a videographer, what I essentially do is help people tell their stories. It's something I'm passionate about. I like to elevate voices. And as a sound recordist and as a post-production sound designer and editor, I basically just work with sound. I help capture the best audio that I can on productions. And then when it comes to post-production, it might be cleaning up bad audio. It could be adding sounds and then mixing it. So to the final sound of what you would hear when watching one of my films.
So to that end, doing all of those particular things that you've just listed for us, what is one of the most meaningful projects you've gotten to work on where you've gotten to employ that list of skills that you have?
Yeah, thanks for the question. It's hard to think of a specific project. I work a lot with nonprofit organizations in Nelson, and I find that work very meaningful because these are excellent organizations in our community. And what I just mentioned, I'm most passionate about elevating voices, particularly voices that are underrepresented, that have historically been marginalized. So that when I get to do that, which is quite often, that's the work that I find most meaningful.
And so am I right that you've gotten to have a bit of a balance between commercial work and nonprofit work? Am I right in this? Yeah, sometimes I'm even confused about the terminology that's used sometimes. So when I think of commercial work, maybe when most people think of commercial work, they're thinking about businesses or corporations. I look at it as basically work that I'm hired for and paid money to do. So in that context, I think I consider the work that I do for nonprofits commercial. So just to make that distinction, what I would consider outside commercial work are my own projects, my own passion projects, the projects that I, go and seek grant funding for, like the current documentary I'm working on now. Those I would consider outside of the commercial world, but I do suppose I would consider the work I do for nonprofits commercial too. But
yes, it's a blend. It's a mix. I have to make a living somehow, and I'm very fortunate to be able to do this and make a living, while living in a rural location. It's not the easiest thing to do.
Mm-hmm, no kidding. And so you've already kind of given us a little bit of a teaser here. Can you tell me about this documentary you're currently working on? Because you have turned the camera on yourself for this one.
I have. So this is a new thing for me, and it's scary and it's very vulnerable and revealing. But yeah, I've chosen to put myself into this film. It's a documentary that is going to explore identity and the idea of belonging. Because I was born in Canada, I'm the one of four boys. My parents immigrated in 1971. I was the only one of my family who was born in Canada.
And where I grew up in a suburb of Vancouver, it was a very white place. I was one of maybe 2 or 3 other visible minorities. And so when I reflect back on that, being middle-aged now, I can really start to put words and concepts to what I went through at the time, where at that age, in elementary school years growing up, I wouldn't have been able to. So things like, I often talk about this memory I have of being a kid and having a shower and scrubbing my skin really hard to try to basically be more white. And this wasn't because I was teased or bullied, or there was no blatant racism, towards me, but internally, without any of that, I knew that I was different, just because not just the neighborhood was white, but the culture, the media, everything said to me that being white was normal. So I wasn't white. I was out of the normal. And so, yeah, that's what I think is what really interests me in this, is this idea that you don't have to experience blatant racism to have racism, systemic racism, affect you. And so so it's basically looking back on that time and then charting forward, how that has affected me throughout my life.
And so this project and having the camera on yourself and digging into the stories that you're digging into, do you feel a shift in your relationship to your ancestral identity, to your Filipino heritage? Can you tell us a little bit about that personal journey for you?
Yeah, absolutely. That's the one of the biggest things. Because of this project, I am exploring my roots, my family history, my culture. Growing up, I didn't learn the language. I didn't know much about the culture other than when it was, when we would have large family reunions or dinners or something, I would experience some culture through that. But I wasn't explicitly taught culture or language. I'm 47 now, and at no other time in my life have I been interested in learning about my family history and culture. For whatever reasons, the reasons probably changed over time, but this is a time in my life where it is now a very important thing to me. And I'm just happy that I'm able to explore it now, and I've shifted so much. I've learned so much.
And I can't let this question slip by. Why do you think it's at this time you're drawn to finally explore this part of yourself? What is it about this? What is it? Tell us. Yeah.
No, it's a really good question. I've wondered that myself. Like, why didn't it happen earlier? Why was I never interested in it when I was younger? I mean, before I try to answer that, I will say that, and maybe I alluded to this earlier, that in my younger days, I was even ashamed to be Filipino. There was that shame existed. So that to me is a clear reason why I wouldn't have been interested at that time anyway of learning more about my past, because I was ashamed of it. I'm older now. I have hopefully more wisdom. I think to answer the question, though, more specifically, I can attribute it to the growth of the Filipino community in Nelson. When I moved here in 2010, there was a clear lack of diversity. Walking around Baker Street, Nelson's main street, it was kind of rare to see another brown person. But, starting, 4 or 5, 6 years ago, I started to notice more diversity, is increasing populations, particularly in the Filipino community and Indian community. And so that really intrigued me, and of course I went on Facebook and found a group because I knew they would exist. And I found the Nelson Filipino Community Society of BC. They're actually a registered nonprofit organization. They're really well organized, and they do a lot to support other Filipinos that are coming into the country that have arrived in the country. And not only that, they also volunteer within the community. So they do a lot of really, really great work. But I just started reaching out to this community, to members in the community. I met some of them. I attended a couple of their events. They like to put on events. It could be something for Christmas or for Halloween, or they play basketball and volleyball. So I went to a couple of events, and I've slowly made friends with some people from that community, and that's part of what is driving this as well. Yeah, because to further this, one thing that I noticed too is when I would go to these events, or when I would spend time with these other Filipinos, of course I didn't fit in because I don't have the same cultural relationship, right? I can't relate to them on a cultural level. I don't speak their language. So there's those barriers that exist. So it just puts me in a very interesting place, I think, where I feel like I've always felt like I fit in and belonged in Canada. I feel like I'm, quote unquote, as Canadian as the next Canadian, as anyone else. But at the same time, it's contradictory. I have a conflict inside me where I don't quite fit in, and I definitely don't fit into this community of people who come from where I came from.
Oh my goodness gracious, that's such a potent place to be. And I can only imagine, and I think I know a little bit from my own experience, that individuals who are exploring being a part, exploring their heritage, and yet are recognizing all of the ways in which they don't fit into that heritage community. So Carlo, how do you feel? Because this project is still ongoing. It's not yet been released. It's still developing. So how does it feel to know that you are revealing such a personal story for the world potentially to have access to? What's that like for you at this stage?
Yeah, like I said, it's a bit scary. I have no idea how people are going to respond to it. What I have found, though, in the little bit of, I'm on Instagram, people know about the project. Some people know about the project. And what I've heard many times from people is how much they resonate with it. So that has been very, validating, I think, for me in that regard. So that's nice. I am far away from completing this. I'm looking at a late 2024 completion of the film. And, when we're at that stage and when I have a better idea of how the shape that this is going to take, I might have a better answer. At this point, I don't know. But it's, I think like anyone who's doing this kind of stuff, there's fear, and there's the classic imposter syndrome. There's all these questions like, who am I to do this, or what am I doing? It fluctuates.
Oh yeah. As you have alluded to earlier, it sounds like equity, diversity, and inclusion, representing historically marginalized and underrepresented groups, is something that you hold really dear. So what does that look like in your work, or as your practice, or in your practice, forgive me?
Yeah, I think, and just to kind of go back to like the why of this, going back to my childhood again, it's the media that I saw, the stuff that I was into, the TV shows, the music, and everything that I was into, you rarely saw a visible minority in these spaces. And so for a long time, I was entertained by this, but I didn't necessarily think that it was for me, that I could inhabit these spaces. When I started to see more diversity, whether it was in rock music or just in the shows I was watching, especially rock music. That was when I would see a brown person on stage. I was like, oh, because I was into music. I was very into music. I was like, oh, maybe I could do this too. Or hockey. These places that are just dominated by by white people. So that's kind of, on a very deep level, I understand the importance of representation. I know what it means. When you watch, when The Little Mermaid came out, the new one, I haven't watched it yet, but I know she's black. And I've seen the reaction videos. I don't know if you've seen these, but there are reaction videos where black moms are showing their black daughters this Little Mermaid, and they are losing their minds. They are so excited. And that, yeah. Are you getting emotional? Because I'm getting emotional.
I am.
Yeah. So that just really speaks to the importance of representation. And so a lot of the work that I do does forward that. I do a lot of work. I'm very fortunate to do some work with Indigenous communities. And I'm so grateful to do that. And, ideally, it's an Indigenous person in my shoes doing this, but if that's not possible, and, I when I work on these projects, I'm so trying to remain so just uber sensitive to, their wants and their needs, and make sure that I, as much as possible, get out of the way, like in those instances, I see myself as a conduit. And so I want them to tell their stories. I can help put it together in the way that they're happy with. So that's how I see my role in that. And then, a big aspect of, or big motivating factor for this documentary is I want to diversify the media landscape more. So if I can add to it, I will.
So I want to bring us back to the young Carlo, the little boy, scrubbing at his skin. What do you think it would have been like for you to witness the piece that adult Carlo is creating now? If that little boy could have access to what you are creating now, what do you think that could mean for him?
Yeah. What could that, I guess, I suppose there would be a better understanding of acceptance, maybe. And again, it's not that I didn't feel accepted. I did. My friends at the time I never felt like I was ostracized or anything like that. But there's something deeper than that, I think, that was at play. And even if it's just internal, it's important. But yeah, I guess if he could see what I was doing now and just know that it's okay, basically, it's okay to be different. Maybe it's even better to be different. I have my oldest brother. He's 10 years older than me, but he was a punk rocker in the late 70s and 80s, at a time when punk rock really was punk rock. Punk is different today, but that was the time when they truly were outcasts and counterculture. And I've asked him about, did you feel outside? Did you feel like you didn't fit in? And his whole thinking around, he was a punk rocker. So his way of looking at it as a punk rocker was he was brown and a punk rocker. That made him even more punk, and I love that.
Yeah.
I wish I had that attitude at that time, but, we live and we grow up and we learn.
Yeah. I know that you are a man with your fingers in several different pots, and I want to make room for some of the other projects. And I would love to turn our attention to something I know, or I believe I've heard, is really meaningful to you, and that is your work as a sound recordist, and that is an entire universe of artistic work and skill and knowledge, and a lot of us don't think very much about it. So can you tell us about that passion of yours?
Yeah, well, I'm glad you asked about that, because it is often overlooked. It really is overlooked. I think anyone who works in sound will feel the same way when they say that, yeah, it's underappreciated.
when something sounds good in a film, you don't notice it because that's just what it is. You think that's just the way it's supposed to sound. But if something doesn't sound good, you definitely notice it. So you'll often hear people say, you can watch a poorly shot film with great sound, but try to watch a well-shot film with bad sound, and it's a much different experience. So I don't know. It's I have a tendency to gravitate towards things that put me in the background and that are a little underappreciated. For example, I play bass. I play a few other instruments too, but bass is what I really love playing, and it's one of those things too where that's very much underappreciated. No one notices the bass player; they're just standing in a corner. And what's interesting though is I gravitate towards these things, and I like to tell myself that. Maybe this is an ego thing. I like to tell myself that I'm the unsung hero, or I'm in that kind of realm. But then on the other hand, there is a part of me that also wants to be recognized and also wants to be acknowledged. So it's this really weird tug of war between these two things, because I really do genuinely love being in the background and doing these things that other people might not notice, but then I also want to be noticed.
Oh yeah. Oh my goodness gracious. And so I think you're getting quite a bit of that with the project MoCrazy Strong, because I understand your sound work is receiving some international notice. Could you tell us a little bit about that project and your work for that project?
Sure, yeah. And I love when you say international, it makes it sound so fancy.
Oh, yeah. But it's the truth.
Yeah, there was a documentary produced by Mark Lockie and Jamie MoCrazy, who is the skier in the film. Mark Lockie, I met him. He used to live in Kimberley. He's now, I believe, in Calgary. But he brought me on board as the sound designer and mixer. And the film is a story about Jamie, who is an ex-Olympic skier, freestyle skier, and she had a terrible accident. I don't remember the year, but this is some years ago. She had a terrible accident and she almost died. She ended up with a traumatic brain injury, but she made a incredible recovery. And today she is an advocate for traumatic brain injury and a motivational speaker. That's the story of the film. And so, yeah, my part in it basically was to build the world of what where the film took place, which is lots of, as you would expect, skiing shots. So it was essentially sound editing and then adding all of the sounds to put you in those locations. Because when I got the project, there was very little sound in it. So it was almost like, other than the voices of the people speaking, it was almost like watching a silent movie. So to me, that's so satisfying. It's so satisfying when someone who watches it, and this is what I mean when it sounds not noticed, because they watch this stuff and they think, oh, that's someone skiing. That's what it sounds like. But without realizing that all the work that went into adding those sounds in post-production and creating this, and the whole point of the sound design is to make it invisible or transparent to a viewer. Yeah, and so to talk a little bit about the accolades it was getting, it was nominated for, there was a few awards it was nominated for at the, I don't know if I'm gonna pronounce this right, but I believe it's Palladino. No, I'm not even going to try because the name is, it's an Italian sports film festival. Apparently, it's the longest running sports festival of its kind in the world. It's the 43rd year this year. And yeah, it was nominated for Best Sound Mix. I know it was nominated and it actually won for Best Lead. So Jamie, congratulations, Jamie, on that. And there might have been one or two other nominations. So I don't believe the sound mix won, but I'm just proud to have been
acknowledged in that way. I mean, it's what an honor, win or not.
Oh, yeah. Wow. And I really respect and appreciate this, the language of the unsung hero, because you're right. So many of us foolishly assume that the sound score of something that we're watching and enjoying is just organically a part of it. And no, there's a whole universe of expertise and knowledge into crafting what we are experiencing.
Absolutely. And this is, I always think about Dune. I don't know if you've watched Dune, but it won best sound design it won an Oscar for best sound design. And it's science fiction. And just like any other science fiction movie, there are many things that don't exist in the real world, right? But when you're watching these things and you're hearing them, you don't question it. It sounds like what it should sound like. But someone creatively made that sound from nothing. They attributed a sound to this thing that doesn't exist in the real world.
That's magic.
It is. It is. But when you're watching it, the whole point is when you're watching it that you're not distracted by it, right? That it blends seamlessly.
I'm honestly learning something right now.
Oh, that's great. I'm here to educate.
Thank you. Wow. Okay, so I think I'm ready to ask you our $1 million vibrant Basin question, which is, how has your artistic practice, and I know you do a lot of things, so you can sense which one you want to lean into, but how has your artistic practice shaped, shattered, or simply shifted your understanding of yourself, your heritage, or the community you live in?
Yeah, I think I have a couple of answers, and one, the most obvious to me, is my current project, Outsiderness, the documentary, has obviously shifted me in regards to how I'm exploring my history and my culture, and just talking to lots of other Filipinos. They might be new Filipinos who've just arrived in Canada or been here a few years, but also other, like me, second generation Filipinos who were born and raised in Canada. It's also, I'm talking to my family a lot more, to my parents, to my brothers, and I'm learning a lot more about my family history through them, which is, these are conversations that I've never had them, and I don't think anyone in my family has ever really discussed these things definitely to this extent. So, that's a huge thing for me, and my parents are getting older, and I think, when you talk about timing, I feel like it's a really important time as well to capture these things before it's too late, right? When I think about my journey and just what I find myself doing these days, I used to work in a corporate office. I used to do IT work, and I did that for a long time. And at one point, I thought that's probably what I was going to do for the rest of my life. So to think about, the journey that I've gone on to get into media, into something that I love to do, has changed me profoundly, and has allowed me to express my creative side a lot more than IT might do. Wasn't a whole lot of creative, although troubleshooting, when you're troubleshooting, it's a very creative process.
Oh yeah.
Yeah, so it's problem solving, right? Which I think a large part of creativity is about that too. So yeah, did that answer it?
Totally. Yeah, totally. And so for those of us who want to stay connected to this work you do, how can we find you?
I have a website at carloalcos.com. I'm on Instagram at Carlo_Alcos. My Outsiderness documentary project also has its own Instagram account, and it is Outsiderness_doc. And one more thing, if I may, I just started a Substack, and if you don't know, Substack is I don't know a whole lot about it, but it seems to be a hybrid of newsletter and blog. So I just started a Substack there. So outsiderness.substack.com is where I'm going to be doing basically some journaling, some writing along the way. I used to write. I was a writer and an editor for many years. And so I haven't done much, if anything, in recent years. So I'm really looking forward to getting back into some writing.
Oh, beautiful. Well, thank you so much, Carlo, for telling us your story, giving us a little bit of a window into the multifaceted creator that you are.
Well, thanks for your interest.
Have a wonderful day.
You too.
Thank you for listening to the Vibrant Basin podcast. I'm your host, Shayna Jones. Vibrant Basin is produced by the West Kootenay Regional Arts Council. Thank you to our sound technician and editor, Carlo Alcos, and our producer, Kaylee Linz, with production support from Margaret Tessman and Natasha Smith. Thank you to the Government of Canada and United Way British Columbia for their support of this project. You can find all our episodes on your favorite podcast platform or the West Kootenay Regional Arts Council website. We'll be releasing a new episode for you every 2 weeks. Stay tuned and stay vibrant.